hospitals a lot here in California. The
Right.
nurses oftentimes are only speaking Tagalog, and
Right. Right.
Mary will back me up on this. Sometimes they don't want to speak English here in the United States, so and specifically in LA. But yeah, no, it is an interesting thing, by the way, that I don't think a lot of people
It's a
know, and I will
scary
tell you
thing.
this, which is that in Israel, a lot of the medical professionals actually are Arab, both doctors and nurses. It's a huge profession for Arab Israelis is working in the medical professional as medical professionals, doctors and nurses. So I think sometimes people are a little surprised that it's not a this country of Jewish people. There's not a
Well,
lot of that the
one
Jewish
A lot
doctors.
of Jewish doctors.
one of the messages I was in touch with her a lot, and one of the messages I got was, I'm in Israel and I'm getting, who would have thought I was hoping for care and attention. And I said, you're in Israel. Have you met an Israeli?
Well,
You're gonna
well,
just be on your own.
I think one of the things I don't want to talk anymore about Israeli hospitals, but I will tell you this: for people who've been to hospitals, and God forbid, but one of the things that Jen noticed that is not uncommon in some places, and definitely was the case in her hospital. Do you want to, Judith? You want to comment about the food service? When Jen told you how the food service ran?
Yeah, they bring up the food in trays and leave it outside, and you have to get it. And this is a woman who had to use a
They need you to
bedpan.
get out of the bed and be mobile. Come.
She had to use,
come
I
on
mean,
carts, and you have to go out and get your own food.
it was like
I mean, you don't have to go
48
down to the
hours before they
cafeteria.
would let
You
her
have to go to the
walk.
hallway. You have to go to the hallway, but yeah, you go to the hallway to get your food.
You go to the
They
hallway to
want
get
you.
your
They want
food.
you to be. They want you to be mobile.
Yeah, right. She was using a bedpan, for God's sake, Stillman.
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing
It was
at
quite the
her.
experience.
I'm laughing at an American who finds themselves in a foreign hospital and
I'm glad I decided to come home. I'm sick of Israel.
Yeah, but you would have ended up in Hadassah.
I will tell you this, guys. Though, in all seriousness, though, we were up in. Oh goodness, that's actually weird. That's a freaky thing. I just realized. So we were up in the Golan Heights that day. So we had lunch at a Druze village. And again, for those who are not really sure what the Druze are, not Druids, but not Druish, but Druid. The Druze are an offshoot of Islam that live really only in Syria, Lebanon, and in Israel. They are, and if they live in Israel proper, they're citizens. They have full participation in the country. There's some of the best soldiers, officers are Druze. In the north, in the Golan, though, up until recently, they never would take on Israeli citizens. They're very, very loyal to whatever country they live in. So if they live in Syria, they're very loyal to Syria. If they're in Lebanon, they're very loyal to Lebanon and in Israel as well. So because the Golan Heights was annexed by Israel, they kind of purposely said that they would not take on Israeli citizenship, and they'll wait for a final answer, and they have a lot of them have family living in Syria. So we were in a Druze village for lunch. We just stopped into a place, and we've done it in the past. Almost every one of our trips, when we go to the Golan Heights, we stop at a Druze restaurant. In this case, it was the holiday of Eid was going on, which is Islamic holiday. So the restaurants were closed. Yes, it's funny you don't look Jewish, yes. For those Spaceballs aficionados, someone always makes that joke when we're in the Druze.
Are they blue? Jewish. That's the other joke. Are they blue?
No, it's from Spaceballs. It was Joan Rivers. It's a long story. Anyways, go watch Spaceballs. You'll see the Jewish line. Anyways, so the Druze are very nice. And so we stopped at this person's house. It was like a hospitality, like an Airbnb, and they had an area that they set up for restaurants, for food service for their guests. Anyway, so they accommodated us. Very nice. So we went there. We had traditional Druze food, and somebody asked me, and that's weird. It was that day. They asked me to ask the woman whether, as Israelis, but not citizens of Israel, whether they were entitled to medical care. And that's weird because like an hour later is when she fell. So I can't remember who asked me to ask. So I asked her. I asked the Druze woman, and very nice woman, I'd say she's probably early 60s. I said, do you guys have access to Israeli hospitals, or do you run your own healthcare autonomously in this area? Because this area, Majd al-Shams, is right on the border with Lebanon, right on the border with Syria. People used to even walk back across, back when things were calmer in Syria. They would go to Syria occasionally, cross over and visit their families. Anyways, she said, no. She says, we all have medical care in Israel. We're all given medical care, even though they're not citizens. And we're not talking about tens of thousands of people. We're talking about a few thousand. But still, she says, we have full access to medical care, and the Israeli doctors are phenomenal. So she says, I really love the fact that we have that. We're very grateful for the fact that we have access to the hospitals. And now that I think about it, who knew that we were probably maybe... Yeah, they do have socialized medicine. So less than 15 miles from where we were standing, probably 4 miles from where we were standing, 3 or 4 miles, was where Jen fell and hurt herself. We ended up bringing her back to the hotel in Tiberias, and then she went from Tiberias to the Tiberias hospital. But my guess is those Druze would also come into the Israeli hospitals in a place like Tiberias. There's also a hospital in Svat where people go to in the north. So it really is a pretty good level of care that is free, and no one has to worry about their medical costs, which for us are obviously one of the biggest worries that we have. I'd say medical and educational costs for us are just, they skyrocket.
Housing.
And housing, but housing's pretty bad in Israel, I will tell you. Housing costs are bad. But medical and education costs, those are things they never think about. They never worry about it. At least, the cost of it. They may worry whether they're getting the best hospital, the best care, but I think they're pretty happy with the care. And again, compared to almost every country, it's pretty darn good there. So that is the one thing I will take away. I do want to tell you, I did get a chance on this trip to study a little bit more than I did in our February trip, mainly because, like I said, I was a little sick when I was there in February. I had a little bit more, I was a little healthier and had a chance to study a little bit on this trip and read some of the texts that we're reading some of the other texts that maybe we'll read at some point. But I did have a chance to do that
But speaking about bad hospitals, let me tell you, Henry Mayo has changed their ways. They're a good hospital.
They're getting better? That's good to hear.
A lot better than they were.
That's good to hear. It seems that way. Yeah, so unfortunately Mike had to be at Henry Mayo this week, last few days. So it's good he's back, and hope that Mike stays out of the hospital. All of us stay out of the hospital. That's the one place we don't want to go for this summer. But again, so I hope people are ready to get back into the reading and back into Jeremiah. And I had a chance we're going to read a line today that definitely think about when you're in Jerusalem. A very famous line that we use a lot during the summer, we'll get to in a second. And almost every week we see a line from Jeremiah that's in our prayers, or that we're familiar with, or that you've heard that's invoked. So we're in chapter 16 today, and in the next couple of weeks we're going to get like kind of in the middle part of Jeremiah. Jeremiah wasn't organized like chronologically, so it's not like we're getting to like halfway through his prophecies. We're actually getting through his prophecies, the first part, which are warnings, and not really warnings in the sense that people can do anything about it, but they're like dire alarms that he's telling people. We're now going to get into, in the middle section, an interesting section. We're going to start seeing it today, and then the next couple weeks, we're going to see a little bit more about Jeremiah's life, which we don't get with any other prophet. We also, again, believe that Jeremiah's words are here. The story of Jeremiah's life and the words were probably copied down by the guy we know his name. His name was Baruch, and we know a little bit about him. And he might have actually been one of the most important writers or editors, definitely editors, but also it seems like writers of the Bible, in the sense that he might have been part of the family that wrote the book of Deuteronomy. He probably wrote the book of Lamentations. He definitely wrote with Jeremiah this book of Jeremiah. And he may have organized the histories of the Jewish people from Deuteronomy all the way through Kings. Not necessarily writing them, but editing them and putting them together with an intention. So he's a pretty important guy, Baruch, and we're going to get to him a little bit, but more from the standpoint of what he's recounting from Jeremiah's life. As Jeremiah's friend, as his scribe, as the guy who's kind of the eyewitness to what Jeremiah is doing. There are very few people in the Bible that are really kind of unknown. I'm going to say unknown. It's not like people, we didn't just discover him, but we really kind of started considering how important this guy Baruch really was and is for us. And he's probably one of the most unsung people in Jewish history. Not because, again, he caused things to happen, but because he was a witness to it and because he recounts it for us and preserves it for us. And those people are obviously, sometimes unsung. That we just don't think about them. But they, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't know this stuff. So, and when we think about Jeremiah, the 53 chapters of Jeremiah, we talked about, first book we read was Isaiah, the first prophet we looked at. I mean, we're almost 100% certain that there are two hands in Jeremiah. The first 40 chapters and the last 26 chapters they're so different from each other that we really do think there's one and two Isaiahs. Well, hey, if Jeremiah's 53 chapters, which I already told you are long enough as far as verses and as far as words go, that they're the length of the 66 chapters of Isaiah. But if you really think about the fact that all of Jeremiah and the words around Jeremiah are his, product of one person, one person and a scribe, if you will, there is no book like Jeremiah then. There is no prophetic book that is as significant and it is as much that we have. Because if Jeremiah is two books, no matter what, 40 chapters and 26, neither one of them equal the length of Jeremiah. So, that being said, let's take a look at Jeremiah 16. The last things that we're reading about, again, were Jeremiah's warnings. And as I say, they're really not warnings in the sense that you can do anything about it. But they are, there is hope. It's not like Jeremiah's all, you're all going to die. A lot of you will die, but some of you will survive. But they're pretty dark. So let's take a look at chapter 16. So Rosemary, you're on the line. If you'd wait one second. Has anyone written Judith want to know, a fictional account of Baruch's life? No, but I think you should do that, Judith. No, I not honestly, not that I've ever heard of. I'd like to read it if there was, but I don't think anyone's done a vantage point of what Baruch was looking at from his perspective. By the way, in all fairness, I think there's one or two, maybe more, but as far as well-known books that have a vantage point of like a fictionalized version of what Josephus did. And Josephus we know a lot more about. So
Did Josephus write about Baruch?
he wrote about him. Josephus, though, we know a lot more. He lived 600 years later, 550 years later, and we don't know a lot about, no one's really done a great fictional version of his life, though, like people did things like it. They did Ben-Hur, or they did more Christian, looking at the Christian side of this. But there haven't been many movies that treated that period of time either, with the exception of the movie Masada, with Peter Strauss and Peter O'Toole. There haven't been many movies that focused on that on the Jewish war from that period, let alone the Babylonian War. Very little has been done. Even less has been done about Baruch and Jeremiah and those guys. And I think it's mainly because that's only, well, I'm going to say only, but it's going to really have a very Jewish audience.
Do we know other
Josephus has got at least a Christian audience there too.
other scribes besides Baruch?
Baruch, by name,
Yeah.
we do. We have a few. We have people in the Kings that are mentioned as scribes to the, Shephaniah. There's a few people mentioned by name that are scribes. but nobody like Baruch, who actually talks. You'll actually see his voice. I mean, you'll hear his voice, and you'll hear him write about it.
With other writings too?
Yeah. So Lamentations, he said. When we get to this part of the story, I'll point it out to you. So here is chapter 16. Rosemary?
The word of God came to me. You are not to marry and not to have sons and daughters in this place. For thus said God concerning any sons and daughters that may be born in this place, and concerning the mothers who bear them, and concerning the fathers who beget them in this land. They shall die gruesome deaths. They shall not be lamented or buried. They shall be like dung on the surface of the ground. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine. And their corpses shall be food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth.
Yeah, so that's Jeremiah. I mean, Jeremiah, it doesn't say everyone's going to die, but, that's a pretty horrible thing. That's a pretty descriptive and horrible thing. And that's what's going to happen to people, the kids and the adults. And so the bottom line is, Jeremiah is told by God, you're not going to have a family. Now, it'd be one thing if you said, hey, you're not going to have kids, but you're not also going to have a wife. Now, you could make the argument, well, what's the purpose of him taking a wife if he's not going to have kids? It's the old days, and that's why you did that, etc. But that's not what he says. He doesn't say so that you won't. You're not supposed to have a wife, and also don't have sons and daughters. That's a pretty rough thing. I mean, that's as much as Jeremiah has got grim news for everybody. God's got some pretty grim news for him, because at the end of the day, he knows what's going to happen. He knows what, assumedly he can get out of there. And God says, no, you're not going to have kids. Now, it does say in this place. It could be when he goes to Egypt, well, I'm not going to ruin the story, but when he gets out of Israel, he could have sons and daughters in another place. So that's a little different. But there is this sense of you can't have a family here in your homeland. So that's pretty rough. That's a pretty rough thing to be told. Again, it's a statement. And we saw, and we're going to see other things where other prophets are told to do, when it comes to their own personal behavior, even weirder things. When we get to the prophet Hosea, who's one of the next prophets that we read, you're going to see some weird stuff with Hosea, with his marriage, who he's told to marry, and what he has to do when it comes to his personal life. So there's definitely people who have to take on, their family becomes reflective of their lives. And even Isaiah is told what to name his children. So this is not uncommon. As a matter of fact, we might say it's common for prophets to have their personal lives be directed by God. But it's pretty rough. And at least, again, even if we're going to say he can have a family later, at least for the near term, he can't have a family. Can't have a wife, which means he's got a pretty solitary existence. And as much as it's because God doesn't want him to start a family in this country right now, he's going to be by himself. He's going to be on his own. So it's a pretty tough thing. You can compare it to, a Jewish person being told in 1933 in Germany, being told, given the message that you're not going to be able to be married and have kids here in Germany. This is not a place where you can have kids because they're all going to die. You could see it happening. Now, the person may not leave for another 5 or 6 years. Until it's 5 more years till Kristallnacht. 1938. Still 5 more years. Still 6 years till the invasion of Poland. You'd still have to, it's a long time. 5 years. So even if you said, well, eventually he'll get out, keep that in mind. The issue of marriage and the issue of families, but especially marriage. All right. So let's take a look. For thus says God.
For thus said God, do not enter a house of mourning. Do not go to lament and to condole with them, for I have withdrawn my favor from that people, declares God, my kindness and compassion. Great and small alike shall die in this land. They shall not be buried, no one shall lament them, nor gash and tonsure themselves for them. They shall not break bread for a mourner to offer comfort for a death, nor offer one a cup of consolation for the loss of their father or mother.
So you can see this is all stuff that people used to do for mourners and when they were in mourning. Let's first say for the people that were mourning, and then also what they would do for people that were mourning, which was stuff that we do today. Breaking bread for a mourner, right? Going over and consoling them, offering consolation. We still call it a meal of consolation when we usually call it a Shiva meal, but the real word for it is a meal of consolation.
Did they have Brents back then, Rabbi?
I knew John was going to say, what about Brents? Yeah, not only that, they didn't have Brents, but whatever they had they probably had a little bit of drink with that too, because it says little kos, little cup. Whatever they had, you're not doing that this time. You can also see this weird phrase that they gash yourselves or tonsure yourselves for them. This is what we do when we tear our clothes. But we know that the tradition of tearing our clothes was based on the fact that we weren't supposed to gash our bodies. Why? The Torah says we're not supposed to gash our bodies for the dead, which means people did it. People still do it. African tribes have done it for thousands of years. People do it today when they get a tattoo for their family members on their bodies. There's a human desire to make some kind of marking, and in some of the tribal systems, they mark underneath their eyes. They literally gash underneath their eyes to show where tears were. People today have a teardrop tattoo. People wanted to show outwardly that they were in mourning, that they felt a sense of loss, that they wanted everyone to know that they were dealing with. It's a natural feeling, but we're not supposed to do it to our bodies. And the fact that he says you're not supposed to do it seems to imply that people were still doing it, even though they weren't supposed to do it. So, but you're not only not supposed to go to a house of death, you're not supposed to.
Nor shall you enter a house of feasting, to sit down with them, to eat and drink. For thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, I am going to banish from this place in your days and before your eyes the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride.
Now, before we move on from that line, there it is, folks. Here's your Jeremiah line that we say all the time. All the time. Why? Especially during the summer. All right, one of our Hebrew people who know Hebrew. Judith, why don't you read that for us?
Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala.
Yeah, you should sing it. But anyways, we sing it at a wedding, right? It's part of the Sheva Brochas. Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. Kol sason v'kol. He said, you're not going to hear it. You're not going to hear it. But we do it. Why? because we're literally saying, and it's the same phrase, it's not just the sound of bridegroom and the sound of the bride, it's kol sason v'kol simcha. So when we have a wedding, we're literally saying this is the greatest thing. So here you have a guy who's been told he never can marry.
Smart guy. Sorry.
I don't know if people heard Mike.
I missed that.
He said smart
Yeah, no, what'd
guy.
he say?
He said smart guy. In front of his wife, no less.
No.
He said,
No one has a wife like I do.
that's right. So when we look at a guy saying that he's not, or knowing that he's not going to have it, but he says, God's saying, you're not going to hear this. You're not going to hear this in the country anymore. And so one of the things that we do is we connect ourselves with this wonderful feeling that we have. And that's why, again, as I mentioned before, at a wedding, and these are the lines from Jeremiah that we still use, when we hear Uvchutzot Yerushalayim, when we hear in the courtyards of Jerusalem, which is also part of the Sheva Brachas, the sounds of the bride and sounds of the groom and sounds of the bride, that we say that at a wedding because we always connect it to Jerusalem. So when we break the glass at the end of the ceremony, we say, this is a remembrance of the destruction of Jerusalem. We remember that at our happiest days, we're not supposed to forget Jerusalem. And that goes to the book of Psalms. When we get to Psalms, we'll see, in Psalm, in Psalm 136, when we say, Imesh kachach Yerushalayim, if I forget Jerusalem, if I don't elevate it, El Rosh Simchati, if I don't elevate it to the height of my joy. And what's the height of our joy? A wedding. And so that's why we remember Jerusalem at the happiest moment. We were supposed to remember it because even in our happiest moment, we were never supposed to forget that Jerusalem was destroyed. So how can we be fully happy? And that was considered to be, again, 2,000 years ago when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. That was our compromise with those in the Jewish community who said we can never be happy again. We can never have life again. We can never get married again because Jeremiah said it, and everyone knows that if Jerusalem is destroyed, how can we continue on? And the rabbi said, no. We understand that we've lost our autonomy, we've lost our homeland, we've lost everything, but we're not going to give up. We're not going to annihilate ourselves. We're going to continue on. And so we'll remember Jerusalem at our happiest days. We're going to remember this. We're going to take Jeremiah's words and we're going to reincorporate them and recontextualize them. And we're going to say that we're still getting married, but we're also going to say that we're not going to forget Jerusalem. Which is why when I do a wedding, I always say the words, and thank God Jerusalem is being rebuilt in front of our eyes. Because you can't forget that either. The miracle of Jerusalem being rebuilt in our eyes and having Jewish couples being able to be married in Jerusalem means that we can't do things the way we've been doing them for the last 2,000 years, which is to say, Jerusalem's destroyed. Can't be happy, or we have to remember this. Hey, it's literally saying at the wedding, hey, everyone's having a good time. And remember, Jerusalem's destroyed. Let's bring everybody down. That was the purpose of it. Okay, but Jerusalem's being rebuilt, and that miracle needs to be recognized right now. So when you go around Jerusalem, which thankfully I got to do 2 weeks ago, and see the cranes, the giant cranes that are everywhere rebuilding Jerusalem, if you don't recognize that, then you don't recognize the moment that we live in now. You're not remembering and rejoicing the way Jeremiah also said we'd eventually get to. And we'll get to that, I promise. We'll get to Jeremiah's other stuff that he says in chapters in the future. Now, I also say that it reminds us that there's still suffering in the world and that Jerusalem is not at peace and that there's still suffering in the world. The breaking of the glass can remind us of that. But it shouldn't only tell us that Jerusalem was destroyed, because it's not. The idea of saying that Jerusalem was destroyed is incorrect. Jerusalem is once again a Jewish country, part of a Jewish country, and it's the homeland and the capital of the Jewish people again. And so how can you not say that? How can you not recognize that at a wedding? So that is something, and again, if I'm lucky enough, which I have in the past, of taking people on a birthright trip and then months later, in one case, 1 month later, in one case, a year later, taking them back, bringing them back to the United States. I won't say bringing them home, but bringing them back to the United States and having their wedding and being able to say to them, you got to celebrate in Jerusalem, you got to be in Jerusalem together. That's a miracle. That's something that our ancestors could only dream of. So how can you not recognize that? But again, we're not yet at peace. There's still suffering. There's still problems in our own backyard. There's still problems in Jerusalem. We're not going to say that it's perfect, but we have to recognize the fact that things have gotten a lot better. And we do hear the sounds of joy. Kolsa, I don't like the word mirth. There's no mirth. Who uses the word mirth anymore? Kolsa, so it's the sounds of gladness. What is, the mirth has got to be King James. Is that King James? Yeah. Mary confirms that Kol Sason is King James. But gladness is there, right? Kol Simcha. So sounds of joy, the sounds of gladness, probably the translations that are used now. Kol Sason, the sounds of happiness. And thankfully they are being heard in Jerusalem. So it's a very powerful line. It's hard to understand that we've recontextualized it and we've given it meaning throughout our lives. And again, even today, maybe especially today, it means something to us. So let's continue with Jeremiah's bad side, whatever, not bad side, dark side, the dark side.
And when you announce all these things to that people, and they ask you, what has God decreed upon us, all this fearful evil? What is the iniquity and what the sin that we have committed against the eternal our God? Say to them, because your ancestors deserted me, declares God, and followed other gods and served them and worshiped them. They deserted me and did not keep my instruction. And you have acted worse than your ancestors, every one of you following the willfulness of their own evil heart and paying no heed to me. Therefore, I will hurl you out of this land to a land that neither you nor your ancestors have known, and there you will serve other gods day and night, for I will show you no mercy.
There you go. So, the people are going to come to you and say, Jeremiah, why us? Why is this happening to us? And you're going to tell them, your ancestors screwed up and you're even worse. Now, you wanted to worship other gods? Good. You'll go to another place, you'll worship those gods. You'll go to those places and worship those gods. So, here it is.
Assuredly, a time is coming, declares God, when it shall no more be said, as God lives, who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, but rather, as God lives, who brought the Israelites out of the Northland and out of all the lands to which they had been banished. For I will bring them back to their land, which I gave to their ancestors.
So, Jeremiah says, it's not all doom and gloom, because eventually you will come back. And when you come back, people they're going to some extent, not going to talk about Egypt anymore. They're going to talk about the places that I'm going to exile you to and then bring you back from the next time, which is Babylonia, which is Persia, which is north of us. So, you were down in Egypt. We brought you back out from the south. Now we're going to bring you back out of the north. And to some extent, that's what happens in the modern nation of Israel, except there it was from the north, the south, the east, the west. It was from everywhere. And it continues to be from everywhere, even at this very minute, as people are landing in Israel from America, from Ukraine, from Russia, from Ethiopia. Unfortunately, the Ethiopian exodus has been cut again, unfortunately, in the new budget, which we're working on trying to get that back in there. But there's 1,500 Jews in Sudan that are trying to get out. anyways, that's what's happening now. Even in our own day, people are being brought back. And as much as we talk about Egypt as being the blueprint, as the model, there are a lot of examples of Jews coming back from other places in our own day. And I'm not just saying that because I just got back. I would have said that anytime. This is now every direction. And here's what Jeremiah says. It still rings true.
Lo, I am sending for many fishermen, declares God, and they shall haul them out. After that, I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them out of every mountain and out of every hill and out of the clefts of the rocks. For my eyes are on all their ways. They are not hidden from my presence. Their iniquity is not concealed from my sight. I will pay them in full, nay, doubly, for their iniquity and their sins, because they have defiled my land with the corpses of their abominations, and they have filled my own possession with their abhorrent things.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're going to be we're going to be punished, and you can see it's not just a matter of worshiping the wrong gods. You know, it's sacrifices. In this case, again, it's well, that word there is idols. And abominations, yeah. But nevelah is a corpse. It's a corpse. It's a dead body. So, is it always a human body? Maybe not, but oftentimes it is. So, assumedly, again, this is the human sacrifices that they've been engaging in. So, all right. Now, this next line sounds a little different, like maybe the beginning of a different part of the text, but here it is.
O Eternal One, my strength and my stronghold, my refuge in a day of trouble, to you nations shall come from the ends of the earth and say, our ancestors inherited utter delusions, things that are futile and worthless. Can mortals make gods for themselves? No gods are they. Assuredly, I will teach them once and for all. I will teach them my power and my might, and they shall learn that my name is God.
Wow. Well read, Rosemary, because here, kind of ends with this psalm, this interesting kind of idea, which is as much as Jeremiah recognizes that God is the God of Israel, it says all nations will come, right? It says goyim, the nations will come to you, and they'll say, look, our gods aren't gods. Our ancestors inherited, again, the word that translates as, they translated as utter delusions. They're futile, they're hevel, which is vanity. They are air, they are nothing, and they're worthless. So they're basically saying, look, we had these traditions that were worshiping gods that were nothing. And they are going to eventually become followers of God. They will learn Adonai. They will call God Adonai. They will call God God. That will be their God. So, we can consider that and think about it and wonder if that line indeed did happen. How can we argue that when most of the world, to some extent, has connected with the God of the Bible, the God of the Torah, the God of Jeremiah? The same guy that Jeremiah is telling people, is telling his audience at the time, which is maybe a couple 100,000 people at most, that the whole world is going to eventually worship God. That would have been seen as not only insane, but especially at that moment when people are thinking about it, and Jeremiah is thinking about it, he's going on and on about the fact that there's not going to be much of us left. There's a few 100,000 now. Based on what Jeremiah is saying, there's going to be a few thousand of us soon. And we're going to be very weak. But that's not what he says. He says here that there's going to be this eventual movement towards God. And in one way or the other, that has happened. The fact that Mary's reading out of a King James Bible, the language that we speak, the language that our cultural ancestors, our actual genetic ancestors, the British people, read 400 years ago. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But it's been translated into every language known to human beings. So how could you not look at that and say, wow, that kind of happened, didn't it? At a point where literally the Jewish people were at the weakest that they would be. Because even during the Roman destruction, there were large, by the time of the Roman destruction, there was a huge Jewish community in Alexandria. The largest Jewish city in the world was in Alexandria. The largest Jewish community in the world was Alexandria. The same as in 1945, the largest Jewish community in the world was in New York. The largest Jewish community was in the diaspora. Not when Jeremiah wrote that. The largest Jewish community, he was surrounded by them right there in Jerusalem. And he's saying they're all going to be killed. And yet he says this. That is almost unbelievable that he would have said that. I don't know what else to tell you. So let's take a look at chapter 17. You'll see some words and some lines that we'll also, well, let's put it this way. Some of us will be familiar with these lines, and I'll share them with you when we get to them. Let's take a look.
The guilt of Judah is inscribed with a stylus of iron, engraved with an adamant point on the tablet of their hearts and on the horns of their altars. While their children remember their altars and sacred posts by verdant trees upon lofty hills.
Yep, and again, these are the ways that people are offering up to other gods. And again, that image of a stylus of iron engraving their guilt on their hearts.
Because of the sin of your shrines throughout your borders, I will make your rampart a heap in the field and all your treasures a spoil. You will forfeit by your own act the inheritance I have given you. I will make you a slave to your enemies in a land you have never known, for you have kindled the flame of my wrath that shall burn for all time.
That's pretty harsh. That's the language of Jeremiah.
Thus said God, cursed is the man who trusts in mortals, who makes mere flesh his strength and turns his thoughts from God.
Now that's a great line. That's the way of describing people who don't believe in God and who are trusting in human beings. Who believe that flesh, strength of the body is real strength. Keep that in mind. Koamar, right? Adonai Arur Hagever. Cursed is that person. Arur is the Hebrew word. Arur Hagever, Asher Yiftach Ba'adam. Cursed is the man, cursed is the one or the person who trusts in man, in humans. Keep going.
He shall be like a bush in the desert, which does not sense the coming of good. It is set in the scorched places of the wilderness, in a barren land without inhabitant.
Okay, it's beautiful imagery. And here's the contrary. There's the inverse of that previous line.
Blessed is the man who trusts in God, whose trust is God alone. He shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its roots by a stream. It does not sense the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It has no care in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit.
So that's the opposite, right? The person who trusts in human beings, who's like a bush in the desert, who is going to, it's a bush, it's a sagebrush. It's done. It has no hope. But the contrary, that's the person who trusts in human beings. And here's the line, though, that Rosemary just read. In Hebrew, we say, Baruch HaGever Asher Yivtach Ba'Adonai, V'Haya Adonai Mivtacho. We say that every time we finish our meals and do a Birkat Hamazon. It's part of the end part. It's the end. So if people do a quick Birkat Hamazon, they never get to this line. But it's a great line, and it's a line that is about trusting in God, trusting in God. And so it's at the very end. These lines, is what I'm telling you, these lines from Jeremiah were so powerful, so well written, so on the point that we incorporated them into our daily prayers. And in this case, a prayer that we say every time we finish our food. Oh, well, as I said, we don't say it as much. I'm not gonna, but when we sing it, we say, Baruch HaGever Asher Yivtach Ba'Adonai V'Haya Adonai Mivtacho Nar Ha'iti Gam Zakanti V'Lo Raiti Sadiq Ne'ezov. People don't say it as much because even in traditional conservative communities, people had a problem with the next line, which is not Jeremiah's line. And I think about it. The Nar Ha'iti Gam Zakanti V'Lo Raiti Sadiq Ne'ezov. Some people didn't like that line. There were actually conservative and reform rabbis and Jews who knew the prayer. They didn't like saying it anymore because they didn't like the line that says, everyone loved the Baruch HaGever Asher Yivtach Ba'Adonai. Everyone loves that because it's a great line. It's been incorporated in Christian prayers too. And it's Baruch. It's a Baruch. It's a blessed, right? They don't like the Lo Ra'iti Tzadik Ne'ezov, which literally means Nar Ha'iti Gam Zakanti. I was young and now I'm old. Lo Ra'iti Tzadik Ne'ezov. I've never seen a righteous person go hungry. Now people said, wait a second, that ain't true. That ain't true. So people didn't like the last part, the last part of that prayer. They liked the first part, Baruch HaGever, but the Nar Ha'iti, they didn't like that as much. So some people cut that out and then went right to the end. Adonai Ozlam Yuten, Adonai Ozlam Yuten, Adonai Yivarech et Amo V'Shalom. God gives strength to us, to our nation, and anyways, but yeah, people didn't like the Nar. They didn't like the Lo Ra'iti Tzadik Ne'ezov. Anyways, but it is part of the traditional Birkat Hamazon. This line.
Why did they put that in? I mean, I know it's in the Bible, but
Why did
was the person who wrote that really that naive, or what was he thinking?
Well, here's what I think. I mean, I think I'm correct on this. So the line is Lo Ra'iti Tzadik Ne'ezov. I have not seen the righteous person go hungry. So how do you even justify that, right? So the first is, why is it even there? It's there because we just did the Birkat Hamazon and we just had food, which means, hey, we must be pretty righteous because God made sure we had food. So it's a kind of it's a line that says something about being hungry. So so that's why I got there, right? Because it actually talks about being hungry. But so how do we get to? But that's absurd. That's not true. There's no righteous people that go hungry all the time. So here's the answer that's traditionally given, which is there's hunger and then there's hunger. And somebody who's really righteous is never really hungry because they find a way to push through, and they realize that the real hunger is a spiritual hunger, and they don't have that. They don't have a spiritual hunger. They're spiritually satiated. And so because they're spiritually satiated, they can be hungry. And so it's almost like, there's this understanding that what's real hunger, right? What's really are we hungry for? And it's not the food. So that's kind of the way that it's been understood traditionally, so that people can say that and say, that's absurd. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely connected to the idea of being hungry, and that's why we say it, because we're not hungry. But again, the idea from Jeremiah kind of like reminding us that, look, my guess is that people knew Jeremiah so well that the reason that Baruch HaGever was there, obviously not going to say the negative part, which is cursed is the person who trusts in human beings, but there's this understanding of like what the full context and what the full meaning of what Jeremiah is saying, which is that like if you trust in God, you're never going to be hungry, and you're never going to be cursed, even if you are hungry. Look, just on the level of food, there were times in Jewish history, not all the times, not I'm saying always, but during the Middle Ages, we know that some of the practices of the Jews of Ashkenaz, where many of our ancestors came from, Ashkenaz in France and Germany, that those Jews would actually engage in fasting 3 days of the week. They would not eat 3 days of the week. They didn't eat anything 3 days every single week. So when we talk about fasting for Yom Kippur, or as we're talking about in 2 weeks, on my birthday, I have to fast on Tisha B'Av at night. I'm not going to complain. It's the nighttime. So when Tisha B'Av starts. When we talk about our fast days, they would have laughed at us with our fast days, because these Jews, these Hasidei Ashkenaz, they did not eat 3 days a week, the men at least. So the idea of depriving yourself of food for them was a ascetic principle of one of showing their righteousness. My guess is these lines and some of the prayers that we had came out of that period, which was, what lines are we going to incorporate in the prayers? If you understand that that was the mentality of people at certain periods of time, it doesn't surprise us that they would have laughed at our when we get hungry kind of things. So yes, for those who have talked about or have practiced intermittent fasting, yeah, how about 3 days a week? That is, I forget how old I was when I first read that, and I'm like, that is insane, that they literally ate 4 days a week. Yeah, anyways, obviously Shabbat was one of those days that they were not supposed to fast. Anyways, but we also like this line, the tree that is fed by the waters, that is by the waters. Very much like the words that we see in the book of Psalms. All right, so it's all good, you know, when you get your strength spiritually. So, what are we talking about? Why are people sometimes a problem? Here we go, folks.
Most devious is the heart. It is perverse. Who can fathom it? I, God, probe the heart, search the mind, to repay each person according to their own ways with the proper fruit of their deeds. Like a partridge hatching what she did not lay, so are those who amass wealth by unjust means. In midlife, it will leave them, and in the end, they will be proved fools.
Well, that's a interesting warning for people. It has nothing to do with necessarily like on a national level, but on a personal level, yeah, it's pretty powerful that God knows what goes on in our heads. There is consequences. Not that our thoughts are necessarily going to always lead to action, but it says God repays each person according to their ways, to the things that they do, to the ways that they follow. Now again, your thoughts don't always hit your deeds, because it says that God does repay people according to their ways, according to their deeds, according to what they do. But obviously, putting ourselves in the right frame of mind also helps us have better actions. So, yeah, it's pretty much Jeremiah is laying it out there for you. Let's read this part, because this part seems like a slightly different, little bit of text, as we said. Sometimes these things are kind of pasted together. So let's read this one.
O throne of glory, exalted from of old, our sacred shrine, O hope of Israel, O eternal one, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those in the land who turn from you shall be doomed, for they have forsaken God, the fount of living waters. Heal me, O eternal one, and let me be healed. Save me and let me be saved, for you are my glory.
It's, again, beautiful text. And it's one that, again, has been incorporated into different places, different sayings, sometimes just this one line, Refaini Adonai, I will be, heal me, God, I will be healed. Sometimes we use these words right here, Makor Mayim Chaim, that God is the fount of living waters, Mayim Chaim. Sometimes we use the word Makor, which is the fountain, which kind of by itself is like a short phrase for Makor Mayim Chaim. Makor is a fountain. What's the fountain of? The Makor is a Mayim Chaim. So I've seen places they call themselves Makor, which is more of maybe like it's used by more New Age Jewish sources, organizations, but Makor. There used to be a synagogue, well, I think it still exists, in the valley, Makor or Shalom, which means the fountain or the source of in the valley. It was a Kabbalistic New Age community, Makoram Shalom. So Makor, there was an online Jewish books gift company called Makor for a while. I don't know if it's still there. Mayim Chaim is a living waters is the name for one of the mikvahs. I think the Boston mikvah. There are churches that actually use that too. Fount of living waters has been used as a name for churches, especially Baptist churches and churches that use water for ritual. So yeah, it's beautiful imagery.
I thought it was a mikveh.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, if you were going to call the mikveh anything, Makor Mayim Chaim would be a great name for it, right? The fount of living waters. So again, these are just, how did it get pieced together? How did it get put together? I don't know, but this is pretty nice. I mean, obviously there's the bad part, because people have forsaken him, but also is the good stuff here. And again, this changes a little bit, maybe necessarily from the part that came right before it, but part of the spirit of Jeremiah. Here we go.
See, they say to me, where is the prediction of God? Let it come to pass. But I have not evaded being a shepherd in your service, nor have I longed for the fatal day. You know the utterances of my lips. They were ever before you. Do not be a cause of dismay to me. You are my refuge in a day of calamity. Let my persecutors be shamed, and let not me be ashamed. Let them be dismayed, and let not me be dismayed. Bring on them the day of disaster, and shatter them with double destruction.
Yeah, double destruction, yeah. That's the translation of Shibarun Shavrim, which is double, utter destruction. That's probably, what does the King James say? Double destruction? So, oh, actually, sorry. No, the word mishneh there is the word doubled. And shibarun, the word shever, destruction, is used twice here. Shibarun shavrem. But the word is mishneh, which means double destruction too. So it's like really bad destruction. Shibarun by itself would just be double destruction. So it's actually like quadruple destruction. But here's the interesting thing about it. Jeremiah tells us here that he's being persecuted. We haven't gotten really to what that means. We will. So it's, like I said, it's not really chronological in the sense that we've heard the prophecies, and now we're going to see like what Jeremiah is going to tell us, or Baruch is going to tell us what Jeremiah is talking about here. We haven't gotten there yet, but we will see it, and we will see Jeremiah most definitely being persecuted. And to some extent, he's saying, God, look, there's people walking around going, Jeremiah's lying. Jeremiah's telling us all these bad things are going to happen. They're not happening. And Jeremiah's like, just let it happen, God. He said, bring it on. To some extent, it's because like I'm getting persecuted here, God, and nothing's happening. People don't believe me. Just let it happen. So you can see Jeremiah's frustration. You can definitely see the fact that, like, he also, he's probably feeling too, just God, get it over with. Let it come already. Let's get over it. So let's take a look again, keeping in mind that we also are not necessarily following these things chronologically, but what's going on.
Thus said God to me, go and stand in the people's gate, by which the kings of Judah enter, and by which they go forth, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say to them, hear the word of God, O kings of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem who enter by these gates. Thus said God, guard yourselves for your own sake against carrying burdens on the Sabbath day and bringing them through the gates of Jerusalem, nor shall you carry out burdens from your houses on the Sabbath day or do any work, but you shall hallow the Sabbath day as I commanded your ancestors.
Yes, so Jeremiah goes into, or is told by God, go into the gate in front of everybody, including the kings, including everybody who should know better, and regardless of how powerful they are, you go and tell them, stop doing stuff on Shabbat that you're not supposed to be doing, including carrying stuff and doing work and doing stuff you're not supposed to be doing on Shabbat, carrying your goods and services. You're doing this on Shabbat. You're not supposed to be doing it. Go there in front of everybody and tell them what they're doing. Call them into account. By the way, we were in Jerusalem 2 Saturdays ago, and I will tell you, without a doubt, Jerusalem in my lifetime has gotten ever more strict about driving and doing stuff on Shabbat. It is impossible to find a restaurant open on Shabbat in Jerusalem. Oh, not impossible, it's almost impossible. It's virtually impossible to find a restaurant that's open on Shabbat, which means you have to eat at the hotel. It's almost impossible to find a car on the streets of Jerusalem. And I'm not talking about the old city. The old city actually, at least in the Arab quarter, is functioning. But it's almost in Damascus Gate area in East Jerusalem, that area is functioning.
My folks were there in, I want to say, late 70s. Mom and Dad said, I mean, if you wanted to eat out, you had to go to an Arab restaurant.
Yeah, that's been, the restaurant situation has been the case for a while.
Yeah.
But in my lifetime, they literally shut down entire streets. Like you can't drive down the streets, certain streets in Jerusalem now on Shabbat. So they enforced that. They enforced no buses. They enforced no, again, not allowing shops to be open on Shabbat. So virtually the entire place is shut now on Saturdays. And I've seen it, like I said, in my own lifetime.
Saturday evenings like Fairfax District?
They do, but because we were there in the summer, And because the summer goes out, the Shabbat goes out late, right? So it was 9 o'clock, 9:30 when we could eat dinner Saturday night. There were restaurants and there were shops in Ben Yehuda Street that during the summer don't open. So in February they open. Like Kippah Man, my favorite Kippah store, he did not open up on Saturday night. He did not open on Motzei Shabbos because it was too late. And there were some other gift shops on Ben Yehuda Street that did not open on Saturday night. So there are businesses that during the summer that will not open. They were open in February. They were not open in June. Again, Shabbat is always 25 hours. Yeah, it's always 25 hours. It's just a question of whether it starts at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever, and goes all the way through. Yes, it is the way Fairfax used to be.
Well, because we used to go to Canter's as a kid.
Yeah.
And nothing was open. And then when we got out of the restaurant, everything was open.
Yeah, yeah. So Cantor's was open, but nothing else on Fairfax was open. So yeah, that is the case in Jerusalem today. We walked all around Jerusalem on that Saturday. We walked to synagogue in Jerusalem, Harel, the oldest Reform synagogue in Jerusalem. We also walked to the Israel Museum. I definitely walked a lot on Stop at Shabbat. We walked a lot.
Was it real hot there?
It was not terrible actually. We were lucky. We didn't have terrible heat, but we did walk to the Israel Museum and got to spend a little time there. It closes at 4. But the problem is this was actually an issue. We had to have lunch at the hotel. There was no other place for people to have lunch, so we had to have lunch at the hotel, and they wouldn't open lunch until 1:30. So we couldn't leave to go to the museum until 2:30. So we only got like an hour. Oh, it closed at 5, sorry. The museum closed at 5. So we really only had like an hour. And they closed at like 4:30, 4:45. They were hustling us out of the museum. But we really only had like 2 hours there because of Shabbos. But yeah, Shabbat is really, really observed now in Jerusalem. And even in Tel Aviv and in other cities, it's harder to find things that are open on Saturdays because people cannot get a kosher certification if they're open on Saturdays. People used to kind of turn a blind eye on this stuff back in the 70s and 80s. They gave you a kosher certification based on your food. You could find kosher certifiers who didn't necessarily care whether you were open on Saturdays. Nowadays, you can't get it. If you're open on Saturday, somebody's going to nail you, and so they won't give you a kosher certification. So unless you're willing to open up and do business without a kosher certification, you're going to be closed on Shabbat in Tel Aviv and anywhere. So they've gotten much
Mark?
stricter. Yeah.
When we were there for the girls, which is, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, we ate at a restaurant on Shabbat for lunch, and it was kosher,
Well, it was Arab.
but it was
Arab owned, but it had kosher food, but it was not. It didn't
Oh,
have
okay.
a traditional kosher certification. Yeah, it was all kosher, but it was not. It did not have a kosher.
it didn't have certification.
It was very hard to find. So we were able to do that, and
It's good too.
it's now, now it's gotten to the point where we can't. I did actually find a few places, but not that we could have taken 30 people to. There was a few coffee shops, a couple places that were like, wow, they're open, but it's not easy to find in Jerusalem, and like I said, it's not even easy to find in Tel Aviv. So when people are looking for when they're traveling, it's tough on Saturdays to eat anywhere but the hotels, and the hotels are expensive. The hotel charges $30-40 for, I think, $30 for lunch, $40 for dinner. It's a buffet, but it's still not cheap. So
And it's a cold buffet, I assume.
yes, it's cold buffet, correct. It's not heated on Shabbat, but it's it's like meats, and it's cold, cold cuts, and they have cholent. You can get cholent. That there is one hot thing is the cholent, which is the Jewish stew. The stew that can sit overnight. And again, almost all the people that work in the hotels are Arab, primarily because, even in Jerusalem, because again, they can they're working on Saturday. So, yep. So Jerusalem today definitely keeps Shabbat, and you got to be prepared for that when you go. And again, it's not just Jerusalem. So, Jeremiah is telling people you got to keep Shabbat. But what are they doing here, these people, in his day?
But they would not listen or turn their ear. They stiffened their necks and would not pay heed or accept discipline. If you obey me, declares God, and do not bring in burdens through the gates of this city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath day and do no work on it, then through the gates of this city shall enter kings who sit upon the throne of David with their officers, riding on chariots and horses, they and their officers, and the citizenry of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall be inhabited for all time.
Wow. So if you do the right thing, if you do the Shabbat the full way, right, then you will have kings, right? Then you will have these gates open. There will be people here, and this place will be inhabited.
And people shall come from the towns of Judah, and from the environs of Jerusalem, and from the land of Benjamin, and from the Shephelah, and from the hill country, and from the Negev, bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices, grain offerings and frankincense, and bringing offerings of thanksgiving to the house of God.
Yeah. So they're going to come from everywhere, right? They're going to come from all around, and from all around Israel. And they're going to be bringing burnt offerings, and they're going to be bringing grain offerings, and they're going to be bringing incense, right? Frankincense, which is the translation that we used, later on, or the English translation we used later on. By the way, it's not called frankincense because of the Franks, by the way. I looked it up. I was curious to see if the Franks had anything to do with why we call it frankincense, and it's not. It was not the French that it was not Frankenstein, but it is the word franc in this case, frankincense, is franc not because it's French, but because franc means noble or pure, which I think, again, is interesting, because I guess that's where they get their name from. They call themselves noble and pure people, but not because it's from France. So frankincense obviously is known from the and we had some people that bought frankincense when they were in Jerusalem. A lot of people like to get frankincense when they're in Jerusalem because of its association with Jesus, with the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which reminds me of Life of Brian, where Jesus' mother goes, I don't need the myrrh. Where's the gold? I don't need the myrrh. But frankincense was very, very expensive. And in Hebrew, it's livona, which in Greek, it's called libanos, which is clearly from Livona. So the word in Greek came from the Hebrew or Semitic word. So it was considered to be very valuable as a offering. And you can still buy it today in the streets of Jerusalem. You can buy frankincense. But yes, it is not French, which I was curious whether they lent their name to it, but no. I mean, obviously it existed before there was a France, but that's not where the word comes from. All right, but here's the line that we can see right here.
Is it where the word French comes from?
That's what I'm saying. I think the French named themselves noble or pure because the word franc meant noble and pure. So yes, they called themselves. I think they called themselves that. So again, the French, whatever. The word franc, that's what it means. So, and remember, the Franks were not French to start with, as much as they were German, a Germanic barbarian tribe, right? The Franks, but whatever. It was just one of the names for part of that area where they came from. But that's what franc means. All right.
But if you do not obey my command to hallow the Sabbath day and to carry in no burdens through the gate of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will set fire to its gates. It shall consume the fortresses of Jerusalem, and it shall not be extinguished.
Yeah, so it's not good if you don't keep Shabbat. The whole city is going to be burned. Yeah, you can see that Jerusalem has to keep Shabbat, which is maybe one of the reasons why people in Jerusalem today want to make sure they keep Shabbat, because there seems to be a connection here, at least in Jeremiah, with doing the right thing and having your city on Shabbat and having your city survive. So there you go. Sha'arei Yerushalayim b'yom Shabbat. That you keep it, and the city will be safe if you keep Shabbat. All right, now let's look at chapter 18. Let's see if there's any words that you know of or things that you've heard of.
The word that came to
If you're
Jeremiah.
Christian, wait, I want to say, if you're Christian, you know this scene a little bit. All right.
The word that came to Jeremiah from God, go down to the house of a potter, and there I will impart my words to you. So I went down to the house of a potter and found him working at the wheel. And if the vessel he was making was spoiled, as happens to clay in the potter's hands, he would make it into another vessel, such as the potter saw fit to make. Then the word of God came to me. O house of Israel, can I not deal with you like this potter? Said God. Just like clay in the hands of the potter, so are you in my hands, O house of Israel. At one moment, I may decree that a nation or a kingdom shall be uprooted and pulled down and destroyed. But if that nation against which I made the decree turns back from its wickedness, I change my mind concerning the punishment I planned to bring on it. At another moment, I may decree that a nation or a kingdom shall be built and planted. But if it does what is displeasing to me and does not obey me, then I change my mind concerning the good I had planned to bestow upon it. And now say to the citizenry of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, thus said God, I am devising disaster for you and laying plans against you. Turn back, each of you, from your wicked ways and mend your ways and your actions. But they will say, it is no use. We will keep on following our own plans. Each of us will act in the willfulness of our own evil heart.
Yeah. So Jeremiah is supposed to teach the people this lesson. Now, the lesson is such that, hey, maybe God will change his mind and not bring destruction on us. But Jeremiah's already been told that's not the way this is going to play out. And that's, again, what makes Jeremiah a little different. Because if it just ended with, go down to the potter's house and take a look, what's the lesson here? And it ended there, which is, hey, it ends here, then that's a normal prophet. But Jeremiah is being told, no, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to listen to you. So not only are you giving them a warning, but I'm going to tell you that warning's not going to be heard.
Assuredly, thus said God, inquire among the nations, who has heard anything like this? Maiden Israel has done a most horrible thing. Does one forsake Lebanon's snow from the mountainous rocks? Does one abandon cool water flowing from afar? Yet my people have forgotten me. They sacrifice to a delusion. They are made to stumble in their ways, the ancient paths, and to walk instead on byways, on a road not built up. So their land will become a desolation, an object of hissing for all time. Every passerby will be appalled and will shake their head. Like the east wind, I will scatter them before the enemy. I will look upon their back, not their face, in their day of disaster. They said, come, let us devise a plot against Jeremiah.
Let's before we get to that one, let's just finish this one piece right here, though. So again, very similar to what Jeremiah's been telling us, that we're going to be destroyed. And people are going to look at this and they're going to learn from it, and it's just going to be like an example of destruction, right? Desolation, destruction. We've seen these words, right? Now, this is what Jeremiah does throughout the book, which is tell people, you know, you've been doing the wrong thing. I've warned you. You're not listening, and now this is what's going to happen. So there's really not a way out. That's the difference. There isn't really a way out. Now, when we talk about this part, which we really don't understand from the standpoint of what the significance of it is, this metaphor that he uses here, the house of the potter, the potter's house, this is used in Christianity quite a lot. There's actually churches called the Potter's House. I remember I had a meeting with a pastor at the Potter's House Church over in Claremont. They still use this phrase, the Potter's House. We don't use it as much. I think it's possible because a lot of the metaphors and a lot of the I think to some extent, because, you know, a lot of the handcraft stuff that, like, we didn't do this stuff for a long time. We didn't make pottery, and we didn't make a lot of these kinds of items that the terminology and the identification and the terms didn't resonate as much with us. A lot of it had to do with the fact that Jews weren't allowed in guilds, and they weren't allowed to be craftsmen in most countries, and so, especially European countries. So I think the idea of thinking about being potters was really not, there weren't Jewish potters. So the whole kind of concept of having, like, what a potter does and being around potters and having family members who were potters was not something that we really kind of identified with. So that might have something to do with it. Definitely, you know, in our day, we don't think that much about it because most of our serving ware is mass produced, and even if it's made out of ceramic or porcelain or something that was handcrafted and not made by a machine, it's not made in America usually, and it's not something that we think about. Anybody who's going to be a potter, who's going to craft handmade ceramic servingware, is probably doing it more out from an artistic standpoint, and it's something that you bought in, you know, Taos, New Mexico or something, and not necessarily from the guy on the corner. So a lot of this imagery doesn't mean the same thing to us today, but you can see it. I mean, you can understand why it was a powerful image, because Jeremiah is supposed to look at the guy on the corner who's doing his work, and look at what happens when you don't get the result that you wanted, right? You shape it into something else, right? And so God is the potter in this, and we're the clay. And the final vessel, the final production, is going to some extent be dependent on whether the potter is happy with the way it came out. And there's this definite feeling here that God is not happy with what we look like, how we're our behavior, our who we are is not good, and God is just as soon going to start over. Now, that being said, there is a further reason why, when this language got incorporated into Christianity, there was a feeling like oh, God started over with Christians and started working with a new clay, or not a new way of forming the clay, right? So there is that sense too that for Christianity, that the potter was actually redone. The pottery was redone during the time of Jesus. So that's another level to this that I think makes Christianity incorporate this a little bit more than Judaism. Clearly, when Jeremiah wrote it, 600 years before Jesus, he wasn't thinking necessarily about this being a prophecy for Christianity, but if Christians thought it was, it's not really doing anything else than the rabbis have done for centuries, which is recontextualizing it and giving it new meaning, which is that But on another level, obviously Christians read it not as the replacement theology that is also definitely there, but there is also this understanding that each person, to some extent, is clay in the hands of God. It's not necessarily a religious or cultural thing, but it's an individual thing, right? Which is that, let me be like a jar of clay. Let me be something that God can remodel into something that comes out better. So there is that sense that, if we are imperfect, if we are spoiled, that we can actually be kind of made into something a little bit better. So you'll hear that in Christian theology and Christian writings, and there is a really one of probably the most popular Christian bands of the last 25 years is a band called Jars of Clay. Yeah, Christian rock band from Nashville, Tennessee. See? So again, very important for, again, later on in Christianity during the time of later on as when Christians kind of recontextualize that. And of course, it's very similar to the kinds of parables and things the way Jesus spoke. But you can see it again, even as early as Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is talking about the local craftsman, just like Jesus would talk about a fisherman or a potter or somebody else. It goes back all the way to Jeremiah. All right, so let's take a look back at Jeremiah. Let's see what he says. Here it is.
They said. They said, come, let us devise a plot against Jeremiah. For instruction shall not fail from the priest, nor counsel from the wise, nor oracle from the prophet. Come, let us strike him with the tongue, and we shall no longer have to listen to all those words of his.
Yeah, so this is another, and again, you can see how it's written. It's not a prophecy. It's not Jeremiah speaking of the word of God. It's Jeremiah talking about his own life and what people are doing to him. They're coming against him.
Listen to me, O Eternal One, and take note of what my enemies say. Shall good be repaid with evil? Yet they have dug a pit for me. Remember how I stood before you to plead in their behalf, to turn your anger away from them? Oh, give their children over to famine. Mow them down by the sword. Let their wives be bereaved of children and husbands. Let their men be struck down by the plague, and their young men be slain in battle by the sword. Let an outcry be heard from their houses when you bring sudden marauders against them, for they have dug a pit to trap me and laid snares for my feet. O Eternal One, you know all their plots to kill me. Do not pardon their iniquity. Do not blot out their guilt from your presence. Let them be made to stumble before you. Act against them in your hour of wrath.
So, again, that's the end of chapter 18, and you can see that Jeremiah is dealing with his own personal crisis of what is happening to him. And it is affecting him There's no question it's affecting him because he's asking God to punish these people who are making life difficult for him. So what Jeremiah is dealing with is not only the fact that he's telling people a message that they don't want to hear, they're clearly acting out against him, and he's dealing with it. He's physically dealing with this, and he wants the people punished because they're making life hard for him. So keep that in mind. I mean, Jeremiah flat out said it. I want these people punished because they're making life hard for me. And all I'm doing, God, is telling them what you told me to tell them. So Jeremiah, he's saying to God, do what you said you were going to do, because they're making life really, really hard for me. That's what Jeremiah just said. So we're going to finish up with this chapter today. And next week and then the week after, we're going to see Jeremiah. We're going to see more details on what Jeremiah is really saying. Because so far Jeremiah is just saying, they're trying to get me, they're doing this, they're doing, he's talking about it in a general way. We're going to see specifically what they do to him. And it's going to be there. So back to the potter.
Thus said God, go buy a jug of potter's ware, and take some of the elders of the people and the priests, and go out to the valley of Ben Hinnom at the entrance of the Harseat gate, and proclaim there the words that I will speak to you.
Okay, go back to go buy some stuff from the potter, right? Go buy a jug, and go to the valley of Ben Hinnom, which is the Ben Hinnom Valley is that valley right outside the wall, right outside the temple. Go to that Ben Hinnom Valley. And again, this is the steep valley right by the city of David today. And here's what he's going to say.
Say, hear the word of God, O kings of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, I am going to bring such disaster upon this place that the ears of all who hear about it will tingle. For they and their ancestors and the kings of Judah have forsaken me and have made this place alien to me. They have sacrificed in it to other gods whom they have not experienced, and they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. They have built shrines to Baal, to put their children to the fire as burnt offerings to Baal, which I never commanded, never decreed, and which never came to my mind.
And here it is, right here.
Assuredly, a time is coming, declares God, when this place shall no longer be called Tophet or Valley of Ben Hinnom, but Valley of Slaughter.
Right. So it's called Gay Ben Hinnom, which is the Valley of Ben Hinnom. That was a person's name. The guy's name was Ben Hinnom. But he's saying this area outside of our beautiful city of Jerusalem is going to be called Gay Ha-Hergah. It's going to be called the Valley of Death, the Valley of Slaughter, the Valley of Murder. Now, in that very place, they were sacrificing kids to Baal. We know that. Read about it in the book of Kings. It was happening during Jeremiah's own lifetime. They were sacrificing people. The kings themselves were sacrificing their own children to Baal in that very spot. And he's saying that valley is going to be the valley of death. It's going to be the valley of slaughter. This valley that you know is our big valley. It's a valley that protects our city and is part of what makes Jerusalem beautiful. City on a hill surrounded by valleys. That valley, Ben Hinnom, Gay Ben Hinnom, is known as Gay Hinnom. The valley of Hinnom is known as hell, Gehenna. The word Gehenna comes from that valley. That's what that Gay Hinnom is called, the valley of Hinnom. But it's synonymous with hell. In Hebrew and in Yiddish and in our minds to this day, if you say Gehenna, they are not talking about the valley of Hinnom. It's not a place in Jerusalem. It's literally the netherworld. It's hell. It's the worst place in the world. It is destruction. It is nightmare. That valley becomes synonymous with that. So, when you hear the word Gehenna, that's where it comes from. It is Gehinnom. And that's what Jeremiah is saying it's going to be known as. It's going to be known as Gehenna. Gehinnom, but now Geharika. It's going to be a place of death.
And I will frustrate the plans of Judah and Jerusalem in this place. I will cause them to fall by the sword before their enemies, by the hand of those who seek their lives. And I will give their carcasses as food to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. And I will make this city an object of horror and hissing. Everyone who passes by it will be appalled and will hiss over all its wounds. And I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and they shall devour one another's flesh because of the desperate straits to which they will be reduced by their enemies who seek their life.
Yeah, they're going to become cannibals. The people here in this city are going to eat their own children. And that is exactly what we read about in the book of Lamentations. The people ate each other in Jerusalem. So, that is about as horrific as you can get. So, yeah, that's what's in store for Jerusalem. Now, that's what he's telling the people. Nobody wants to hear that. And here's what he's going to do. And you can imagine why he went down to that potter shop.
Then you shall smash the jug in the sight of those who go with you, and say to them, thus said God of hosts, so will I smash this people in this city, as one smashes a potter's vessel, which can never be mended. And they shall bury in Tophet until no room is left for burying. That is what I will do to this place and its inhabitants, declares God. I will make this city like Tophet. The houses of Jerusalem and the houses of the kings of Judah shall be impure like that place Tophet. All the houses on the roofs of which offerings were made to the whole host of heaven and libations were poured out to other gods. When Jeremiah returned from Tophet, where God had sent him to prophecy, he stood in the court of the house of God and said to all the people, thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, I am going to bring upon this city and upon all its villages all the disaster that I have decreed against it, for they have stiffened their necks and refused to heed my words.
So Jeremiah is now, at least from what we just read, he's not holding back. I mean, he's doing what God told him to do. He's not doing it on his own. So he does this very, very powerful visual breaking this jug in front of everybody, or not in front of everybody, but at least in front of the leaders of Jerusalem in the valley of Hinnom. So he takes this big jug and he crashes it down. And again, using that metaphor of the potter, God's not starting over with us. God's not giving us another chance. God's not reworking us into something else. He's not fixing this. He's destroying you. So that's a very powerful image. That's where it's going. And now, he doesn't just do it in the outside of Jerusalem, in the valley of Hinnom, in the area called Tophet. He's actually going into the temple. It says he stood in the court of the house of God and said to all the people. So he went into Jerusalem, into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple, and he said this. Again, God told him to do it. God told him to do it. It's not like he just said, I'm going to do it. But he says in front of everybody, God is going to destroy this place. So this is what you can imagine when we come back next week, the consequences of what Jeremiah just did. And we're going to see not just prophecy, but again, narrative. There's narrative here. This is narrative. That's not a prophecy. I mean, this is his words of prophecy, but it's not really like one of these prophecies where, you can see it in the biblical poetry where you get, you get this kind of stuff, doublets and those kind of things. This is almost all narrative. So this is different. This is not like normal prophecy. Again, you'll see normal prophecy when you get to a prophecy, and you'll see, it'll be laid out like this. You can see it. It's not like they'll show you by the way they lay out the text, the way the verses go. This is not what we're reading right here. This is narrative. So, I promise you it will not disappoint you when you see what happens and how Jeremiah plays this out. It's not all bad, but it's not right now very good for Jeremiah. And it reminds us that people oftentimes are not popular for the things that they say, especially when they're things that people don't want to hear. It's not easy telling people what they don't want to hear, even if it's in their best interests. And that is the lesson that we'll see from Jeremiah throughout. But again, as we finish chapter 19, and again, it's good to have everybody back. Please let everybody know if they're not here that we are back. We're back for a regular. We're not back tomorrow night. Interestingly, the reason we're not back tomorrow night was I was asked a few weeks ago if I would come on a Wednesday night to church and to talk about Judaism a little bit and Temple Beth ME. And so I asked them to do it. They gave me the next 4 weeks to do it. And I said, let's do it tonight. Let's do it tomorrow night. So, because I don't want to get into class and then have to miss another class. So I said, we'll just take this one off. And it's Valencia United Methodist, which is where we're going to be doing high holidays again. So I especially wanted to work with our friends there. And on top of it, Andy, who's a wonderful guy, he's the minister, the pastor at Valencia United Methodist. He's a wonderful guy. I was talking to him while I was on my trip. He was there doing the sound with Michael.
Right.
He's a very nice guy, Andy. Andy is also, can't even say this. Andy is also Tevye right now. He's going to be at the Canyon Theater. He's Tevye. So I'm taking Andy through Tevye. So I hopefully today I'll have the date that we're going to do a group. Obviously people can go anytime. Excellent.
How long does that play for?
I think it's like 3 weeks. I think it's not many shows. It's like, I think it's like 12. But we're going to support him, and I'm counseling him on Tevye, and yeah.
Are we going out to the Reagan?
Yeah, that's what Mike just said. He's actually going out, so I'm still working on it. Hopefully, have that date nailed down too. Everybody who's been there has been very much. Judith, you went, didn't you? Judith, did you go? I guess Judith.
Yes, I did go. I saw it. I can go through the beginning part quickly. It's about a 4 or 5 hour exhibit. If you like to read the stuff, the first half is kind of the history of anti-Semitism and Nazism in the area. So it's really interesting, but it's a lot of reading. And so partway through my visit, I went, hey. And the artifacts are towards the end of the whole exhibit.
Well, yeah, it's a. I've heard, only verifiably important things. Michael Berenbaum, who is the curator exhibit. I was trying to actually get him to come out on the day that
Work zone, bud.
we're going to do it, so he can explain
The
a little
work
bit
zone.
about the
It
why he
just posted.
curated
You
it the
need to
way.
slow down. It's a triple ticket.
Wait, we hear you.
Whatever.
John.
Oh, sorry. We're on our way. We're on our way to Austin
All
for
right.
Phillips. He's starting his job.
Yeah, well, congratulations too, and safe travels.
Rabbi
Safe
says
travels. But I'm
congratulations.
trying to get Michael Berenbaum to at least come out or give us some background and thought on how he curated the exhibit. Michael is the professor of Holocaust studies and does some other stuff at AJU, at American Jewish University. But he was the one who put together the exhibit, and I have a good relationship with him. Trying to figure out some way of doing it, of having him explain it, because deciding on what was going to go into this exhibit and how, because it is going to travel, it's going to leave from here and go to some other places. I can't remember off the top of my head where else it's going to be going to, but this is the first place that it's going to, and then it's going to go on to
Now, where do these
some other
exhibits
places.
come from? Do you know?
Uh,
From
I don't know. I mean, he got permission to do it. Yeah, I'm not.
must
I'm.
be coming from some other museum.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's going to be. It is going to be traveling other places. But yeah, they had to get permission from, obviously, from Poland to take this stuff out and to bring it around. Gosh, I've said it before, I think, but Auschwitz is a town. It's a town in Auschwitzum, and it was called Auschwitz by the Germans.
They talk about that at the beginning of the exhibit also. The
Yeah.
name of the town.
All I can tell you is if I was the city council of Auschwitz, I'd change the name of the town. I mean, I know there's probably they have a proud history of other stuff, but your city has become synonymous with death. I mean, I would literally call it Happy Town or something like that. I would change the name of it because it was a city before, and it can still be another city. And I'm sad for them that they don't call it Auschwitz; they call it Auschwitzum. But everybody knows their town is unfortunately synonymous with the camp. But I don't know. That's just me. There's not a lot of Jews that live there anymore, so it was not a very Jewish town then. Krakow was. But it's down the road from Krakow. It's about 30 miles.
There aren't as many Jews.
No, there's not. There's hardly any Jews left in Poland. But Krakow just did the Jewish festival. So for those who went with us to Poland back in 2016,
They did it again?
yeah, they're back. They're back to doing it. And they always do it at the 4th of July weekend. So we finished
That
our
was
trip.
good.
We finished our trip. The Stolmans, you guys were there too. We did the.
That was great. We need to do that
We
again.
did the trip. We purposely ended the trip in Krakow at the Jewish festival so that we did not finish with just sad thoughts, because it's very hard to go to Auschwitz and not. I mean, what can you say? It's just so hard, but and I've been there a couple of times, and I can't even think about it without getting upset. But because you live your whole life and you don't think that it happened, and then you're actually in the place where it happened, and you're like, this is still unbelievable that there's actually a place. It's like a nightmare, right? It's a place that you think about, but you can't imagine that it's real. So
Bring up the star, the
I will also,
yeah, Twilight Zone.
Death Heads Revisited.
Yeah, Death Heads Revisited. That's right. One of the most powerful Twilight Zone episodes.
Who wrote it?
Yeah, Rod Serling. But yeah,
I'll also tell you
We're right up there.
that having been to Yad Vashem, this was possibly the first major exhibition of Holocaust artifacts that I saw since I was in Yad Vashem, and it felt different than it used to.
wait, the exhibit did, or that Yad
I
Vashem
didn't
did?
like my experience of the exhibit wasn't as I'm going to use the word positive, but that's not quite the right word, wasn't as meaningful because I'd been to Yad Vashem, if that makes sense.
I guess. I mean, to me, the most powerful Holocaust museum is actually Washington D.C. Honestly, I don't think
I've
there's
never
a
been to that one.
better curated Holocaust museum in the world than.
Years ago, the temple went to the one that was in.
Yeah, but the Children's
Yeah.
Memorial,
What? What would you say?
the Children's Memorial.
Yeah,
But
no. Yad Vashem is powerful in a different way because of the Children's Museum, because of the Righteous of the Nations Garden, and there's so much that was powerful at Yad Vashem because it's in Jerusalem. But as far as the curation of the exhibit, to me, and obviously that's where dignitaries all go. There's the area where they place a wreath. The Yad Vashem is very powerful because of its place and because it's the repository of the history. And because of the, because every Israeli soldier has to go to Yad Vashem, and I've been there when they go there. Yad Vashem doesn't allow guns to be brought in. Nobody can bring a gun in Yad Vashem. It's one of the few places in Israel that you cannot bring a gun into. So the Israeli soldiers all have to stack their guns up in this area, which I've seen, where they stack up their guns when they go into the exhibit. It's very powerful to see it. You go out and then you see the stack of guns. It's a powerful image at Yad Vashem. Anyways, I will just finish with the story that just happened at Yad Vashem 2 weeks ago. So they have they have the Hall of Records, which is one of the things that Yad Vashem is famous for. They have a page for every Holocaust. We talked about this because the line Yad Vashem actually comes from, as I mentioned when we read Isaiah, it comes from the book of Isaiah. So a name, that they have a name. Every Holocaust victim was memorialized on a sheet with where they came from, where they were born, where they died. Now they've created these huge books, this huge volume. There's 2 sets of these huge volumes that are mounted on a mounting, and it's like a huge book, and there's 2 of them back to back. And you can go in, and it just has the name of the person who was killed, and where they were killed, and how old they were when they were killed. That's it. It's just names. It's just a list. And each page has like 200 names on it. And so part of it is for you to see how many names there are. Just a list of names with their dates. Maybe there's 500 names per page. I don't even know. It's just so many, and it's a huge book, and there's 2 volumes. So I'm in there, and I'm looking at the pages. I'm in the B's. I'm looking to see other blazers that were killed in the Holocaust. It's not a common name, and so most of them are related for me. And when I see that they're from Krasnobrod and Poland, I know that they're related to me. So I'm looking through the names. I'm in the B's, and about 5 feet away are a bunch of birthright kids, because every birthright kid has to go. It's one of the things that birthright also requires. Birthright has a lot of flexibility, but the kids have to go to Masada, they have to go to Yad Vashem, they have to go to the Kotel. There's like 5 things they have to do. They have to go to Yad Vashem. So there's a group of kids 5 feet away from me. The guy is looking through, and there's 2 young women with him. And the guy's looking through the book, Yad Vashem. He's looking through the F's. And of course, I know what he's going to say even before it. He goes, and here's Anne Frank's name. Points to the other 2 women that are next, young ladies next to him. And one of the other women says to him, Anne Frank died in the Holocaust? And at that point, I looked over at them, and I was like, oh my gosh, our Holocaust education is failing in this country, because chances are these kids had to learn they knew who Anne Frank was. Anne Frank died in the Holocaust? And I almost, but it got better or worse. The girl next to her says to the other 2 of them, I can't even see this. Let's see if we can find Harriet Tubman's name. So she was serious. So I think
No way. No
You
way.
lie.
I shouldn't
No
laugh.
way. No
You
way.
lie. Come on.
Guys, it happened right in front of me, and I
I
couldn't
believe it. I
couldn't
totally believe it.
So they were trying to be. I know she was saying, it's history, but the books are for people. Oh, I almost started crying. So I couldn't look over there, and I just walked out of the room. And but Anne Frank died in the Holocaust was one of the words I'll never forget. the Holocaust Memorial. It's why Holocaust education is so important. But yeah, Anne Frank died, and then Harriet Tubman. Let's find Harriet Tubman's name. Anyways, I don't know if that's levity, but it is thinking about serious stuff. There you go. If you don't laugh, you cry. So I will tell you, yeah, we're definitely working on the right time to go for the Auschwitz time. It's tough because it's like I try to figure out how do we make this special? How do we make it something that people will want to go to? And then on top of it, how do you take people to a soul-crushing experience, and what do you do after it? You know, it's like we take people to Yad Vashem, and we're like, well, what do you do now, right? You know, we're going to go to we're going to go.
Prince.
We're going out to lunch. Exactly. What do you do? And you know, we really did have that. We really did have this issue the last time we went. We went right from Yad Vashem up to Mount Herzl, and we were rushed as we went to Mount Herzl. And as much as that's a soul-crushing experience being at Yad Vashem, you know, you walk out. The last thing we normally do is we walk out of the Children's Memorial, which is, as Judith said, arguably the most powerful thing at Yad Vashem, which was built, by the way, by the Spiegel family from Columbia Savings here in LA. When you walk out of that, and then we go to Har Herzl, and then I go to the grave. This last time at Har Herzl, we only had enough time for me to take people to my student Max Steinberg's grave. Yeah, it was an emotional day. It was an emotional kick in the gut day. You leave Yad Vashem and it doesn't get easier. But then we went into Shabbat and it got easier. But going to Max's grave is still something that, as people who've been there with me now, the ones who were there in February and the ones who people who were there with me in June, it gets a little bit less emotional for me to, let's say easier. It gets a little less emotional for me to tell the story and talk about it, but it's still really hard. I can't go there without crying, and it's hard to be there too. But then again, we went into Shabbat that night, and it started out beautiful by having a beautiful B'nai Mitzvah with 4 of our kids from the temple, so that was really nice. And it ended with the kids sharing some of their thoughts at Shabbat dinner that night. But yeah, it's a tough day. Yad Vashem and Har Herzl are a tough day. Tough day for most people, everybody, I think. So, anyways, with that, have a good rest of the week, folks. We will not, as again, have class tomorrow night, but we'll see people next Tuesday and Wednesday, and then next Shabbat, Friday the 21st, we have Rebbe Sol back to help us lead us in some good songs and get us up for Shabbat. So, we'll see how y'all. Take care.
But everybody.
Thank you.
See y'all. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.